The movie begins with a FedEx package being picked up by a delivery guy. The same package is then delivered to a man in a city. The package has a sticker of angel wings on it. The recipient says that it's from his wife, even though he is with another woman. Next, we see our main character, Chuck, works as a systems analyst executive at FedEx. Chuck takes his job very seriously. He travels the world resolving productivity problems, and currently, he is in Russia to optimize the hub's productivity. To do so, he sent a parcel to himself from Memphis, America to Nikola, Russia, at someone's house. A kid from that house carrying that FedEx package runs towards the FedEx hub and hands over the package to Chuck. Chuck opens the package, which contains a clock. It started at absolute zero, and by the time it reached its destination, the clock was at 87 hours, 22 minutes, and 17 seconds. As per Chuck's standards, 87 hours for a parcel to reach its owner is not acceptable. Chuck wants packages to be delivered to their owners on time. Chuck lives with his longtime girlfriend, Kelly Frears, in Memphis, Tennessee. He calls Kelly from Russia to let her know that he'll be back home in around 18 hours. Later, Chuck arrives in the US and meets up with Kelly. They love each other very much. The two head to the grand Nolan family Christmas dinner, where Chuck's brother brings up the subject of marriage. The couple laughs it off and avoids answering the question. During dinner, Chuck gets a toothache and says he needs a dentist appointment. Chuck then checks his pager while Kelly is looking at him. They both look at each other, and Kelly knows what's going on. Chuck needs to leave for work again, even though it's the holidays. With how committed Chuck is to his work, he plans to go. Kelly accepts this and tries to compromise by asking him to be home before New Year's Eve, which Chuck agrees to. At the airport, before leaving, Kelly gives Chuck her grandfather's pocket watch with a photo of her in it as a Christmas present. Touched, Chuck gives her a small box, saying she should wait to open it on New Year's Eve when he returns, implying it is an engagement ring. Chuck then leaves to catch his flight. Chuck flies with the FedEx cargo plane alongside 4 crew members to Malaysia. A few hours into the flight, the plane gets caught in a violent storm and loses control. Chuck hears the pilots talking about losing all radio coverage, and after that, something in the plane explodes. The plane starts to lose control, and one of the pilots, while trying to get Chuck to his seat, hits his head pretty hard. Chuck sees the ocean getting closer, and the plane crashes into the Pacific Ocean. The plane gets filled with water, and soon Chuck starts to drown. He uses the emergency inflatable life raft given to him by one of the pilots. With the help of that raft, Chuck manages to get himself afloat. But the weather is bad, and strong ocean waves start to hit him. Luckily, Chuck survives and finds himself ashore on an uninhabited island. Chuck is the only survivor. Chuck gets out of the raft and sees that the watch Kelly gave him is still with him. He also finds a few FedEx packages that had been washed ashore. He picks up the packages. He is all alone, with no other island visible for miles ahead. He draws a help sign on the ground to get the attention of any passing planes. The next day, he finds a few more packages. He finds coconuts on the island, with which he quenches his thirst. He goes on to explore the island and finds a cave. He then climbs to the top of the island to get a better view of everything. From above, he sees something in the water and quickly goes down to see what it is. To his disappointment, he finds it's the dead body of the pilot who tried to save him. Chuck digs a hole and places the pilot's body in it. Chuck buries him and writes an epitaph on the rock above the burial site. With that, his second day also ends. That night, he looks at Kelly's picture. On the third night, he sees a ship far away from the island. He calls out for help, but he is too far away for his voice to reach the ship. He flashes a small torchlight, but it also doesn't help. To save his life, Chuck packs his things and rides the damaged raft in hopes of reaching the ship. Unfortunately, the tides are way too strong, and he gets thrown into the water. His leg gets cut on a coral reef, and he screams out in pain. Defeated, Chuck goes back to the island, and it starts to rain heavily. To shelter himself from the rain, he enters the cave, which he discovered a couple of days back. Inside the cave, Chuck finds a small water stream and starts to drink water from it. He then falls asleep, and the small torch he had also loses its power. Realizing it is unlikely he will be rescued, Chuck opens most of the packages, finding useful items he uses to improve his living conditions. In one of the packages, he finds a volleyball. He also finds a pair of skating boots and a dress. With the help of the boot, he can now cut coconuts easily, and he uses the dress to catch small fish. He opens all the packages, except for one package which has a sticker of angel wings on it. Chuck keeps the package unopened to keep it as motivation for him to stay alive and deliver the package to its rightful owner. He finally fixes himself a small tent and tries to light a fire. He tries for hours and hours, but his efforts are futile. He accidentally gets a cut on his hands, which finally breaks him. He furiously throws everything in his sight and shouts at the top of his lungs. After calming down, Chuck draws a face into the blood, names the ball Wilson, and begins talking to it as if he wasn't alone. He also finally manages to light a fire. He is so happy that he starts to dance around the fire. He finally had something to be happy about. He cooks a crab on the fire and eats it, all while talking to Wilson the ball. The next day, he gets a severe toothache. He uses the skating boot and a rock to get his tooth out, but loses consciousness in the process. It is now 4 years since he has been stuck on this island. Chuck isn't the same as he looked 4 years back. He is now bearded and disheveled and has adapted to life alone on the island. Wilson has also changed a lot. In the time he has spent on that island, Wilson has become an important part of his life. One day, when he's sleeping in his cave, he hears a noise, and when he goes out to check, he finds a broken piece of a plastic door and brings it with him. Chuck looks at the broken piece of plastic door, thinking about what to do with it. Finally, Chuck gets an idea of what he can use it for. Chuck has created a monthly chart to calculate the time. They're currently in February, and Chuck tells Wilson that they are getting out of there in April, when the sea waves will be in their favor. Chuck plans to get out of the island in 2 months. He starts to prepare a wooden raft. He also makes ropes out of tree skins and uses those ropes to tie the woods together. When he is out of rope, he uses the cassette reels to tie the wood. But he still needs some more rope. He goes to the top of the island to get more rope for the raft. Here, we see that in the 4 years, Chuck had nearly given up on his life and was contemplating suicide. However, he didn't go through with it, and now he uses that rope and fits the plastic sheet in his raft in a way that would help the raft sail. The time has finally come. Chuck writes a message on a rock before boarding his ship with Wilson and the unopened package. He starts to row the raft and manages to keep the raft afloat, despite the strong waves. Chuck thinks that he has overcome all problems. He spends more days on that raft, in hopes it will sail him back to where he can get help. He doesn't have any food or water, so he drinks the rainwater collected in his raft, and he starts to catch fish to eat. One night, it starts to rain heavily, and Chuck holds onto the raft for his dear life. When the storm clears, the raft is in very bad shape. To make matters worse, Chuck cannot find Wilson. He starts to panic, and then he finally sees Wilson floating a little far away from the raft. He jumps into the water to save Wilson. He reaches out with his one hand to get to Wilson, while his other hand holds the raft. The rope keeps getting out of his band, so Chuck has to stop to get it back. By the time he gets the rope back, Wilson has drifted further away from Chuck. He desperately tries, but he just cannot reach Wilson. In the end, Chuck loses hope of getting him back and cries out in pain of losing the only friend he had in the 4 years he spent on that island. Wilson is lost, and the raft is broken. There seems to be no hope for Chuck. Chuck gets sick and cannot even move. He finally gives up. Just when he had given up, a cargo ship is seen approaching. Chuck finally opens his eyes and turns back to see the huge cargo ship passing by. He desperately raises his hand and cries out for Kelly. The cargo ship hoots at him, and he is rescued after suffering for 4 years. 4 weeks later, Chuck is flying in another FedEx cargo plane to go back to his home and meet his family and Kelly. He is eager to see Kelly and is worried he won't have anything to say to her. His pilot friend tells him that everyone had thought he was dead, and so they held a funeral for him. He also tells him that Kelly had to let him go. The FedEx family waits for him, and when he lands, they even hold a press conference to welcome him. Chuck goes to a room to wait for Kelly, but he is surprised when a strange man comes to meet him. The man introduces himself as Kelly's husband. He tries to explain that Kelly was too emotional and confused to see him. Chuck stays there silent, without knowing what to say or do. The love of his life, who he thought about all the time while struggling to survive on that island for more than 4 years, had married someone else and even had a child together. Chuck watches as Kelly and her husband get in the car and leave. His friends and family hold a party in celebration of his survival. After everyone leaves, Chuck looks at a lobster. which makes him think of the crabs he ate while on that island. He also looks at a lighter, which reminds him how important fire was to him. Chuck can't even sleep on his bed. He lays on the ground, staring at the same watch which Kelly had given him years back. Even though she had married someone else, Chuck needed closure. So he takes a taxi to Kelly's house. Just as Chuck is about to ring the doorbell, Kelly opens the door and invites him inside. Chuck wants to say something, but Kelly immediately hugs him. Chuck hands her the watch she gave him as a present, and Kelly is shocked to see that he still has it. Since it's a family heirloom, Chuck wants Kelly to keep her watch. Kelly then shows him that she had kept his car after he had gone missing. She hands him the car keys, and Chuck gets inside the car. The two of them share a kiss, but Kelly pulls herself back. Chuck starts to drive away, and Kelly realizes she still has more to say. She calls out to Chuck and starts running towards him. Chuck also gets out of his car, and they kiss. Kelly says that after 4 years of him being lost, she had to let him go. But she always loved him, and will always continue to do so. Chuck says that he too loves her, but he knows that it's too late for them to get back together. Kelly also cannot leave her family for Chuck. They decide to leave each other. Chuck then goes to his friend and tells him that he was helpless when he was on the island. He even tried to hang himself, but his weight was too much and the twig snapped. He says that he knew that he had to keep going, one breath at a time. Then the tide gave him a gift in the form of the door. That's when he knew it was time to go home. He says that even though he is very heartbroken that he lost Kelly, he knows that he has to keep breathing because tomorrow the sun will rise, and who knows what the tide could bring. The following morning, Chuck goes out to deliver all the packages he opened on the island, drives to Texas to return the angel-winged package to its sender. Finding no one home, he leaves it at the door with a note saying, "This package saved my life. Thank you, Chuck Noland." While driving back, Chuck stops to take a look at the map. He is thinking about where to go next. Then a woman stops her car and asks if she can help him. Chuck asks where the roads ahead of him lead to. The friendly woman tells him where each of the 4 roads lead to, then she says goodbye and leaves. When she drives away, Chuck notices the same angel wings on the back of her truck, which was on the package he didn't open on that island. The package which saved his life, by giving him motivation to stay alive, belonged to the woman he just met. Chuck then looks down each road, trying to decide which way to go. The film fades out as we see the final direction Chuck is looking at is the direction in which the mysterious butterfly woman drove off. He smiles. Thank you so much for watching. Please show your support by liking the video.